Greetings, Earthlings. We're going to talk a little today about BCS tractors and tightening up your handlebars. This is something that as one of these walk-behind tractors gets a little worn over the years, the handlebars will get a little sloppy. You can see how much slop is in those handlebars. There are various ways to deal with this. Now, the methods to deal with this are going to vary somewhat based on the BCS model and year type. This is a 853, and this will apply to all 853 tractors, all 852 tractors, and basically anything BCS has built since I believe 2004 has this style of handlebar on it, except some of the little 710s. Those still have their older style handles on it. But any model except the 710 that's been produced since 2004, what I'm showing you here will work. On older BCS models, I'll have to shoot another video at some point, but a lot of those are pretty easy to figure out. They're nothing quite so esoteric as this one. At any rate, so you see we've got movement here in the handlebars. This can be a little disconcerting and kind of unsafe to use because it's hard to get good control over the machine. Well, you've got two places that the handlebars pivot. You've got the pivot post here, and you're welcome to come in, Logan, and get close-ups if you want. You got the pivot post here that is the thing that the handles swivel around. Okay, so you got a fixed post and then this housing that wraps around it to give you your swivel. Also, there's a pivot point here at the top of the handlebar column. This is the handlebar column. These are the handlebars themselves that go up to the hand grips. You've got a pivot point here where they pivot up and down. Okay, both of those places can get slop in them from wear, and both can be tightened up. So first, we're going to talk about tightening the bottom one. So the number one thing, I'm going to grab a 13mm wrench here. The first thing you want to determine when you've got a lot of side-to-side slop on your handlebars is you want to determine if there's wear in the locking pin. There's a pin down in here, and we can look down in here to see it. This pin right here, now you can't see the pin except right now I'm touching the pin. This is the pin that drops down into one of these holes to lock the handlebar into place rotationally. There are 3 holes on this side and 3 holes on the other side that you can see when you bring the camera around that side. 1, 2, 3 holes that are exposed. So when we turn the handlebars around to the mowing position, those are the holes we're going to use. So those holes will wear, as this pin that drops in there is actually a tapered pin. The bottom of the pin is tapered, so it swedges down into those holes, and as you use the tractor and steer it around, the pin wears a little bit and those holes wear a little bit. And what happens then is, since the pin is tapered, when the hole wears larger, the pin needs to drop down in it further to take the slop out. Otherwise it's going to wobble back and forth. Well, as that pin moves down naturally, because the hole is wearing bigger, it uses up slack in the cable. That is, this pin is moved up and down by this cable, which is operated right here by this lever. On some older BCS models, it was like a T-handle up here, but the concept was the same. The lever moves the cable, the cable moves the pin. So as that pin goes down into a worn hole, it actually is pulling slack out of the cable and making the cable tighter. Eventually, there gets to the point where there is no free play in the cable, and that's where we are right here. This lever barely has any free play in it. As soon as I start pulling it, I'm pulling that pin up. That means that the pin actually may not be dropping fully. It may be simply bottoming out the cable and not dropping all the way into the hole, which will make this problem far worse. So what you want to do first off is loosen the adjustment nut. If you'll have one, even if the cable's mounted over here on a T-handle, it's going to have an adjustment bolt and nut. Loosen up the jam nut and then screw the adjustment bolt in towards the handle, which is going to put slop back in your cable. Basically, you can bring this in to the point where you can come all the way up to the handlebar. If you see right now, I'm squeezing it. I've got clearance here. I'm bottoming out. But if you can bottom out the pin, that is, if the pin doesn't come up any higher and you haven't touched the handlebar yet, the cable's too tight. So actually, screw it in more so that what's your limiting factor is you're pulling it up against the handlebar all the way. So there we go. Now this cable is properly adjusted, and it's going to be a long time before the hole down at the bottom wears enough for that pin to drop in far enough to have to adjust that cable again. So that took a little bit of the slop out of it, but not much. So the other thing we're going to adjust, and this is, I'm going to grab some 19mm wrenches here. I'm going to adjust this big nut and bolt here. This is a big nut, or I'm sorry, a big bolt that goes through the handlebar column and has a lock nut on the other side. Now what we can't see here, because it's all put together, is that what it's tightening down on, kind of behind this washer, this other ring that my fingernail is on right now, is a brass insert. There's one on each side, and they're basically pulled in by the bolt and nut. And the brass insert has a tapered face on one side that the more you crank it in this way and smash those two brass pieces together, the more the tapered surface pinches against the pivot point. So that tightens up your pivot point. Also, these brass bushings that are in here that I mentioned that have the taper on one side to run against the center pivot post, those actually, if you take them out of there, you see that the brass bushing is actually tapered on both of its faces. It's tapered on the face that's up against the pivot post, and there's an extra tapered surface on the other side. So that means you have two leases on life with the thing. So if these bushings get to the point where even with these bolts, the bolt nut cranked all the way in to mash those bushings in as far as possible, if you've still got slop on the handlebar post, well, just remove the bolt nut, flip the bushings around 180 degrees, put them back in against the non-worn side, and you've got a new lease on life. If you wanted to remove this handlebar column completely from this pivot post, actually what you do is take this nut and bolt completely off, take the brass pieces off, and then that allows this whole piece to just pick straight up. The column will come right off the pivot post. So that's your locking mechanism, and it's your adjustment. Now before you tighten anything up down here, you want to make sure it's well lubricated. This is fluid film. This is a lanolin based lubricant, but you can use a spray grease or any good lubricant. Don't use something like WD-40. That stuff only lasts about a week. Use something with some staying power. This is kind of a spray grease. There's a hole in the front here that you can shoot some lubricant in to get into the pivot post right there. Lubing around the pivot post, I'm going to kind of swivel it side to side here and get some sprayed in all around the pivot post. Make sure it's good and lubed. And now I'm going to tighten this nut and bolt up to take the slop out of here. I'm kind of got it snug. What you want is you want it loose enough that it still pivots easily side to side, but there's no slop. So we're about there. I think I can get it a little tighter actually. Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. I can still move it easily, but there's a little bit of movement. You can see it's starting to move the engine back and forth a little bit there. That took a lot of the slop out of it. See, now when I move it, I'm moving the tractor almost immediately. I took like 80% of the slop out of it there, maybe 90%. You're never going to be able to get it all out because sometimes that little hole that the locking pin drops into simply gets worn in an oval, and you're not going to take it all out. The next place that we notice we have movement here, if you notice, the handlebar column, the top of the handlebars are actually moving independently of the handlebar column because I've got too much slop here. Again, this wears over time, and this is where we need a 13mm ratchet and socket and ratchet rather. And I'm going to lubricate up here. These U-shaped bolts wrap around the top of the handlebars here. There's two of them, and they pull the handlebars down into this little cradle. Well, these U-bolts go through the bottom here, and they have lock nuts on the bottom that hold them in place. You got 4 lock nuts, and you can tighten those lock nuts as needed to take the slop out of this handlebar system. So I'm making sure everything is good and lubricated here. I'll move them up and down a little, kind of spread the lubricant around. And now, again, I'm going to bring these down kind of evenly on both sides. And bring them down snug so that I can still move the handlebars up and down, but there's no slop in them. I want it tight enough basically that when I hit the release bar here in the middle, the handlebars don't just drop on their own from gravity. I have to actually push the handlebars down. But they pick up and down firmly, but relatively easily. I don't have to, like, you know, grab a pry bar or anything. So this is good. And we have zero slop at the top of the handlebars now. They're solid with the rest of the unit. And that's basically it. How to tighten your handlebars on a BCS. Thanks for watching.